with Japan has been severely damaged after Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi suggested earlier this month that a Chinese attack on Taiwan could trigger a military response from Tokyo. Beijing's Commerce Ministry has warned that her remarks undermine the political foundation of bilateral ties and threatened that Japan would bear the consequences if it does not reverse the course. Tokyo maintains that Takaichi's comments do not signal any shift in Japanese policy. The escalation comes as China remains Japan's second largest export market, purchasing roughly $125 billion worth of goods last year. Analysts say Japan would struggle to replace China if Beijing restricts trade, especially after past incidents where China used economic pressure, including bans on seafood and rare earth exports. U.S. Ambassador George Class said Washington will stand by Japan if China imposes new trade measures. Japanese seafood producers, still recovering from previous restrictions, now fear a renewed clampdown. Let's listen to Stefan Nagy, Professor of Politics and International Studies at International Christian University, analyzing the situation.
What we understand is that this success has troubled the Chinese. They felt that she would be a short-lived prime minister, an unsuccessful prime minister. But with this successful foreign policy outing, I think they felt that it was an important time to start putting pressure on Japan. And when she made comments that a Taiwan contingency would be a security threat for Japan and Japan would have to intervene militarily, this was an opportunity for China to step up the pressure economically on Japan.
Now for this discussion, we welcome back Dr. Asta Chadda. She's a Ritsumeikan University Associate Professor of International Relations, joins us live from Kyoto. Thank you very much, Dr. Chadda, for joining us again. Good to see you.
Thank you, Asma. Yeah, good to see you too.
Same. Now looking at this, how do you think, how should Japan balance their security concerns and its stance over Taiwan with these economic risks of provoking further trade retaliations from China?
Well, I mean, the Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi's statement explicitly mentioned that a military activity or a military attack or aggression against Taiwan would be read or would be interpreted as the survival threatening situation for Japan, right? So there is a potential that it could turn to Japan authorizing its military for some sort of an intervention, but not exactly. I mean, that remains still a little bit ambiguous. But what remains very, very clear strategically is that the Japan-China relations are at a new low, and Beijing seems to be, coming to that realization that since Japan has taken a very strong stance, this would be appropriate for them to start pressurizing Japan on areas that hurt the most, one of which being economics. So the best course of action, at least for now for Japan, given that the Prime Minister has already made the statement, would be probably to stick to this, but also avoid any further direct confrontation, because ultimately neither China nor Japan seek to or would gain much if there were to be a full-blown military conflict.
And thank you for sharing that. And just now we heard Professor Stefan Nagy. He said that China is just testing waters with how far Prime Minister Takaichi would go, or the reaction of Japan. What's your analysis on that?
I mean, for sure, China is by, these coercive measures, whether it's stopping trade or banning seafood, this is not new. I mean, these actions keep recurring, specifically when we look at China anytime there is a diplomatic activity that China disagrees with. So, I mean, testing waters is yet another thing that China does again and again in response to things that it feels like they need to respond to. But what is very different about the situation this time is that probably if Japan continues to hold a very, very strong stance, if similar statements continue to come out of Japanese leadership, this is very likely to provoke a stronger reaction from China, which would not be only limited to trade and economics. It is most likely could even go into escalation of, let's say, some sort of a military presence around the Senkaku Islands, which are also disputed between China and Japan, so as to put real pressure on Japan.
And how do you think, how should U.S. and Taiwan show support on influencing Japan's decision-making if tensions with China over trade and security continue to escalate, like you already mentioned, there could be some possible ways that this could go.
I mean, given that Taiwan is anyway very strategically important and quintessential to United States, Japan, and in fact most of the countries, because it is one of those undeniable, indispensable hubs for semiconductor industry. So, given that Taiwan is already important, what is expected out of United States now is to step up its commitments to joint security. The fact that Japan or a country like Japan does not have a lot of nuclear capabilities or even sufficient defense capabilities would be good under President Trump. I mean, he has recently also pledged support for Japan, but would be good to kind of reiterate that every single time so that Japan does not feel very left out and alone in this, though it is not. But yet, under President Trump, things have become quite uncertain. And this includes offering some sort of economic backstops for Japan, offering some economic relief for Japan, because recent President Trump visit to Japan ended up being very good for President Trump because he got the deals that he wanted, but not necessarily very good for Japan, who ended up offering a lot more. So this could be the time for US to in some way respond and reciprocate to that. That's one. Two, would be a good time for US once again to provide its nuclear umbrella security to Japan and reiterate that. As far as Taiwan is concerned, I mean, you were mentioning earlier that the Taiwanese leader showed support, pledged support through this symbolic eating of sushi and supporting Japan. I mean, that is fine, but probably what could be more helpful is that Taiwan and Japan were able to, if they were able to sort of step up their economic activity, step up the kind of economic linkages that they've built over time, so as to increase the stakes for both the parties, were there to be some sort of an intervention.
Right, indeed. Thank you very much, Dr. Asta Chadha, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving on, we stay in the region. An exclusive report by Reuters has suggested that China is mobilizing an armada of civilian ships that could help in an invasion of Taiwan. As per the report, the drills revealed that China is devising concrete invasion plans and rehearsing new techniques aimed at speeding up beach landings of troops and equipments in a bid to overwhelm Taiwan. Let's in fact listen into what Taiwan's retired Admiral Lee His-min has shared.
My guess is that they are trying to develop a kind of large number of the small amphibious landing ships supported by civilian sector, and during the wartime they will conduct the multi-point small amphibious landing operations.
Now for this discussion, we welcome back Dr. Asta Chadha. She's a Ritsumeikan University Associate Professor of International Relations. Joins us live from Kyoto, Japan. Thank you very much, Dr. Chadha, for staying with us. Now looking at us, what are we to make of these reports?
Well, I mean, if they are true, one should be less surprised because, again, gray zone tactics are very classical examples of how China wants to operate, specifically around targets and specifically in zones, maritime zones, where they do not want to technically declare a conflict or declare a war. And these gray zone tactics allow China to maintain, whether it's through a shadow navy or through civilian use, ships like you were earlier stating. This allows China in some way to blockade Taiwan, allows China to put pressure on Taiwan. And very similar tactics have previously been used around South China Sea and East China Sea disputed territories as well. So this is one of those prime examples. If this is, I mean, I do not know about the actual plans, but if some sightings have been made of Chinese ships that are not technically military ships, but they are just vessels that might be equipped, it is a classic example of gray zone tactics.
Yes, indeed. With that, I would like to thank Dr. Asta Chadha for joining us